I'm Marcy Penna. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, in a week remembered for a football passing record, there was short yardage on some of the issues of the day. In New Orleans, the mayor is eyeing sharing the hotel tax for other uses. There are questions about bail reform, and there might be a proposal for a millage to fund recreation. We'll discuss these stories, as well as the upcoming elections, including Secretary of State and constitutional amendments. We'll also look at a guilty plea in a St. Bernard Parish jail death, and Hurricane Michael did damage at some familiar vacation spots. Plus, we'll look back at a super night for the Saints. In the huddle for us are tonight's Informed Sources. ERROL LABORDE, producer of Informed Sources. Stephanie Grace, columnist, The New Orleans Advocate. Bo Evans, reporter, NOLA.com, The Times-Picayune. And Mike PERLSTEIN, investigative reporter, WWL-TV, Channel 4. We're going to go over to ERROL first to talk about Hurricane Michael, which fortunately did not come this way, but unfortunately did hit in the panhandle of Florida.
Most of the reporting we've seen has been what's happened to Panama City Beach and Mexico Beach, which of course is important. We've been curious though because we know that a lot of local people have either vacation spots or property along Highway 30A and the in the Walton County area, the area pretty much between Destin and Panama City, and we were trying to find out some information. It seems like the further east that the property is, people might know Rosemary Beach, for example, that was one of the first examples we heard that area was hit pretty hard. Now, we don't know about the property itself, but there are other places nearby, Alice Beach, and then across the bay, a thing called Caroline Beach, that would probably be the most susceptible right now because the weather was really, really bad. It's sort of like the epicenter for this area, and the first great property development was a place called Seaside, and that's kind of like in the center of that period. And we did see sort of like an anecdotal kind of thing today that people might have remembered the 1998 movie, The Truman Show with Jim Carrey. Well, there was a story today that the building used for Jim Carrey's house in that movie was totally unscathed, except for a few branches. And so if we can assume from that that Seaside itself and all the things west of it survived, and that's a good sign. I do know that in '95, Seaside was fairly new, and Hurricane Opal hit there. And all these places are built with hurricanes in mind. I mean, this is all new architecture. And Opal came nearby, and the worst that suffered was the stairs crossing the sand dunes. The stairs were blown down, but it survived, and so it's pretty hardy property. But right now it seems like everything more towards, as we'd expect, the Panama City area, and it looks like the more you go in the area of Destin and Sandestin, the better it did.
Yeah, well, that was a pretty fierce storm, and
it was.
We really need to thank our lucky stars that it did not come this way. But that whole 30A stretch is a really big New Orleans destination. So.
And you have to think about what happened if a storm that's developed that quickly and came this direction, getting people out. That's pretty scary.
Right, and they can't develop that quickly in the Gulf.
As opposed to us, they're right on the beach. I mean, Highway 30A is not a very wide highway. Then you got the sands, the sand dunes, and then you're in the water. We're at least 100 miles away. So
you do have some experts looking at global climate change is one of the reasons it was able to form so quickly. Usually we track storms at least a week out, sometimes more. For local impact, this gave almost a couple days warning. If that were to approach a major urban area like New Orleans,
and you had to evacuate,
you can't evacuate a metro area of 1.3, 1.4 million. In a day.
But remember Katrina, it was supposed to not come our way, it was supposed to go further east, so we kind of had quick notice there too, if you know. At any rate, when a storm gets in the Gulf in the summer, you have to pay attention to it.
And the fall, it turns out.
And the fall in October as well. Okay, thanks a lot. Stephanie, over to you.
Yes.
Election for Secretary of State
Speaking
coming up.
of fall, it's election time. So we don't have big elections on the ballot this year. Governor races next year. We don't have a Senate election. So the one race we do have is a special election statewide for Secretary of State. And that, of course, is to replace Tom Shedler, who was forced to resign after a longtime employee sued him for sexual harassment and some pretty serious allegations that actually he just settled yesterday. The state settled. So the state is now going to pay $149,000. Shedler himself has to pay some too. So that's settled. The election, his replacement is not settled. there are a couple of interesting twists in this race, and one is that there's a guy named Kyle Ardoin who is not well known at all because he's never run for anything. He was the first assistant in that office. He became the interim when Shedler left and said, I'm not going to run, I'm going to focus on election integrity and all of that. And at the very last moment, he said, you know what, I am running. This office is too important to hand off to someone who, an on-the-job trainee, basically, is how he's been putting it.
And we've seen that movie before.
Yes, we have. He's been wearing Keep Kyle stickers. So it's interesting because you have a bunch of elected officials, former elected officials, who are kind of really all focused on him because they're very angry that he did this. And, there have been some controversies since he took the office. A big one kind of blew up yesterday. There was he had led a new voting machine contract. Again, big deal, election security this year. And the state threw it out. Governor John Bel Edwards' office threw it out because of irregularities, which were already kind of airing. There had already been a challenge by a losing bidder. The head of the state procurement looked at it and said, yes, there were irregularities, you need to rebid it. So, maybe experience isn't looking so great right now. The other interesting twist is that, that aside, Shedler, had a very good reputation for running that office, that, they deal with elections. Our elections are kind of considered pretty secure. Several of the candidates have said so, that that's not the problem. The problem was this personal stuff and the scandal and the kind of, mistrust. So you really have what a lot of the candidates are talking about is it's kind of a Me Too election. I said it's very much like, I will treat employees with respect. I will make the office a safe space for people to work, which is really not a usual campaign plank. And you do have a number of women running, actually. Julie Stokes, the state representative from Kenner, talked in a debate this week about how she stood up when there was, a state representative put kind of a jokey, insulting, degrading amendment on one of her bills towards women, and she's one of the people who stood up and kind of made a stink. She, was talking about that as a credential for that job, which is interesting.
The Secretary of State's office, going way back to a guy named Wade Martin, and from Secretary of State after one, it's always been a fairly efficient office. There's never been real criticism, so you'd be hard put to be running as Secretary of State and say, vote for me, I'm going to clean up this office, because it has a good reputation.
It's not dirty, yeah. And again, you look at some other states. Georgia, we're hearing a lot about it now because the Republican Secretary of State is running for governor, and he's really very much an ideologue, it sounds like, and there are some very serious allegations of, how he's whether certain people are going to be able to vote this fall. You've had that come up in various other states where the secretaries of state are very political. Ours really have not been, and that I think has been a very good thing.
So who's front runner?
So the front runner, we don't know. Julie Stokes, as I said, is A.G. Crow is a former state senator from this area. There's a state representative named Rick Edmonds who is kind of a leader of the religious right. Actually, A.G. Crow is very much in that camp, too. He's out of Baton Rouge, so he's got a constituency. There's one kind of prominent Democrat named Renee Fontenot-Free. She's not well known, but she has been kind of a longtime state official in that office and the Attorney General's office. And because she's a Democrat, most people are saying she'll probably get in against one of the many Republicans.
So likely a runoff.
So likely a runoff.
Okay. All right,
yes.
Steph. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Over to Mike right now. You did a story about a bail reform that's been implemented over at Orleans Parish, and some people aren't too happy about it.
Well, there are a lot of questions, a lot of unanswered questions, because this new program has been rolled out in almost virtual secrecy, and it's quite interesting for criminal court in particular, which tends to, operate independently of city government, number one, and is more tradition-bound. But this is part of a movement that's sweeping the country to eliminate the bail bond industry. One of the arguments being that people who are arrested who happen to be poor are further punished just because of their economic status, that they simply can't afford to get out on bail, whereas people with money can, to continue their lives, to help with their defense, save their marriage, jobs, and what have you. Right. So the result of that is a big push that goes hand in hand with a major push to lower the jail population. The city is a recipient of a $1.5 million MacArthur grant for just that purpose. So City Hall has weighed in. They have a working group that includes a representative of the state Supreme Court, Public Defender's Office is represented. those would be the interests that are aligned on the, I guess, reform side. However, some of the decisions that are being made, once again, without an announcement of this sort of new policy, we're seeing bails of $100, $200 that used to be $2,000 up to $5,000. I've seen some that were $50. I saw a bail that was in the thousands get reduced to $1. Clearly a movement to make it affordable for people to get out of jail. The questions come up with who is deciding which of these candidates and how, so they have a new system, it's called the Public Safety Assessment, run by the court, taken over from a nonprofit that did provide the pretrial assessment. Now it's a public safety assessment, but it also comes from another outside organization, a nonprofit called the Arnold Foundation, and they're using their tool. But once again, cloaked in the secrecy as to who's paying for this, how much. It is administered by people who work for the court. But in my story, we found that some of the criteria, some of the things that might be red flags in giving people low bail, such as multiple prior failures to appear in court on previous charges or a long rap sheet, seem to be ignored. Some of the longest of long rap sheets, people on probation are getting these $200 bails. One person who was charged with an attempted armed robbery at a convenience store got out on a high bail, made it, went right back to that store and allegedly threatened to kill the owner who had reported the attempted robbery and got a $200 bail. So people were up in arms about that. And again, simply because we've had to piece together somewhat anecdotally, because there's, despite City Hall being at this table, it appears that once again, there are many players, including the mayor's criminal justice coordinator, involved in these decisions, but none of them announced. No program announced. There's no rhyme or reason that anyone can see. And now that the district attorney is seeing some of these, what he believes are improperly low bail, he's coming back to court with motions to increase the bail. And some of the judges who get a lot of these cases from magistrate court are granting those motions and jacking the bail back up.
So this assessment tool, who's looking at this? That's in magistrate court,
right? So it is looked at by the magistrate judge, which is a 10 o'clock, bail settings on weekdays, and then the magistrate commissioners, which becomes an interesting element to this.
Who are appointed, not elected.
So they are appointed, and they're basically hired by the court en banc. It's considered one of the plum jobs in which you get to keep a private practice, but for all intents and purposes, sit as a judge for the purposes of misdemeanor cases and bail setting. And they seem to be at the leading edge of this. It's been called a pilot program. Once again, in the documents I was able to uncover that never were announced publicly, an experiment. And again, as these cases surface, as they wind their way through court, all kinds of others are raising red flags, including the DA's office. The bail bond industry is getting cut out of a lot of these. I think there's going to be more fireworks on this issue yet to come.
And all of this still is now being worked out of the court, whereas before Vera Institute of Justice was operating it, but now it is a court office or agency or associated with...
Well, they call it pretrial services.
Okay.
But that's kind of cloaked in a bit of mystery since the program was never announced and how it actually works. But we do know that there's a document that is in the case file of the defendants once they make that first appearance, called a public safety assessment. But again, it looks like in some cases that guideline for who should get high bail, who should get low bail, is not being followed, and some of those people who've been released on low bail have promptly been rearrested.
Because failure to appear is just a big thing on that assessment tool. If you don't, allegedly it's supposed to make your risk number go up if you don't appear.
You would think.
Okay. All right, thanks a lot, Mike. We'll keep an eye on that one. Okay, Bo, over to you. Now, the mayor has floated an idea of diverting some of the monies that is collected from hotel taxes to helping out city infrastructure, like, the drainage or whatever. How is that idea going over?
Well, it's still very much in the early stages, really not even sure what exactly the idea entails. It was an idea kind of floated recently at an event to have some of the funds that are, some of the revenue generated from the complex web of hotel occupancy taxes, there's assessments, there's sales tax locally and state that's levied relative to hotels. To have some portion of that be rededicated towards things like drainage or infrastructure or even the Sewage and Water Board. Having said that, it's an idea that's still very much in the infancy stages from my perspective at City Hall. So we still need to learn more about what the formal proposal might be. And it's looking like in order for us to get a sense of what that is going to be, the mayor is sitting down with people from the tourism industry. There were conversations, I was told, this week. I don't know what was discussed currently, but that's kind of where we are.
That hotel tax through the years has done so much for New Orleans. It built the Superdome, it built the convention center, and then they paid for the Superdome, and then they refinanced the Superdome bonds and built the arena, and so it's really been useful. But
right, the Bureau of Governmental Research did a report on the subject of tax dedications generally, and I think they ranked the hotel taxes and the other assessments at third behind general sales and property taxes. So they do generate quite a lot of money.
So, yeah, right, if these taxes were rededicated, obviously tourism, hospitality would lose some money. I can't imagine they'd be too happy about that. But that has to go through some legislative hurdles, too.
Right, would need to go through the state legislature, and I did talk to a couple of lawmakers, a few of them over this past week, in particular John Laria, who's this president of the Senate, and he's kind of got a lot of say in issues like these, particularly financial legislation, and he doesn't really seem on board with the idea, whatever the shape the proposal might take, particularly if it might involve diverting some sort of funding away from the Superdome. He was very specific about mentioning the Superdome.
So the discussions are just beginning.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll see where this goes.
And even if that doesn't get tapped, one thing it points out very clearly is that the Sewage and Water Board, which has been named as a potential recipient, is clearly in dire financial straits, and you see the mayor's office pushing very hard for alternative funding stream. That's going to have to give in some way or another. They're going to have to find more money for Sewage and Water Board.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of one way or another. Everybody is talking about how more money needs to be drummed up somehow, and it looks like the idea here is to not add more taxes to the scenario, to take what's already there and sort of reapportion it. But if that doesn't happen, then there's not a single person I've talked to who has said we're good with the amount of money that we have for the drainage infrastructure in the city that floods quite a lot. So
seeking a resolution is not going to be without argument, probably. No, not an easy resolution to it. All right, thanks a lot, Bo. Let's go back to Stephanie now. Also on the ballot, some amendments, constitutional amendments.
6 constitutional amendments, and we're going to talk about 2 of them today. 1 and 2, which actually both are somewhat related to criminal justice. One getting tons of attention, one getting very little attention. So let's start with that one, the little attention one, which is number 1. This is a story that's flown under radar a little bit lately, but it was somewhat of a story a couple of years ago. Derek Shepard, remember him, the former state senator who went to prison for money laundering, came out, tried to run again. The voters 20 years ago said, you can't do that. They said, if you are a convicted felon, you have to wait 15 years afterwards to run for office. He basically challenged that in court. He said that the amendment that was overwhelmingly approved by voters was improperly written. Basically, the language on the ballot did not match the language that the legislature passed. So it wasn't over substance, it was over a technical matter. He was thrown off the ballot. He did not get to run. However, later, a judge basically agreed with him and said that this is, threw it out. So for the past couple of years, there's been no prohibition. And there was talk immediately of putting it back, and it failed in the legislature the first time. This year there was a compromise. It had been 15 years. Basically, the people, there was some resistance to making it that long, so it's now 5 years. So that's the question.
Okay, the other one, I've got to move on to the other one.
The other one is unanimous juries, which has gotten a lot of attention. It's a super interesting issue because I think a lot of people didn't know about it till there was a series in The Advocate, and J.P. Morrell, state senator, started pushing it last year. And Louisiana is one of only 2 states where you do not need a unanimous jury to convict somebody of a crime. This issue has its roots in, Jim Crow. There's a lot of documentation.
And oddly, the other state being Oregon, of all states.
Exactly. And which is saying we don't want to be like Louisiana now. We're hearing it that, but there's this coalition from the left and the right that's really fascinating. We're starting to see outside interest groups, the Koch brothers on the right, George Soros on the left. The group on the left has raised $1 million. There are some of the most conservative legislators out there doing ads for it. They're saying it's a constitutional issue, it's a small government issue. Really, there's one voice kind of against it, and that's the Attorney General, Jeff Landry, and even he's not really pushing it. Okay. So we'll see what voters think. That's number 2, and you will be hearing more about that.
Okay, thanks a lot, Stephanie. Back over to Bo right now. Another tax issue, recreation.
Taxes.
Taxes and its renewal of millages, but kind of putting them all together.
Property taxes, right. So currently there are 3 departments, agencies, groups, nonprofits, what have you, that have millages that are going to run out in 2021 or 2022. There's Audubon. There is the New Orleans Recreation Development Commission, which is part of the city. And then there's Parks and Parkways, which is also part of the city. So they have property taxes that are going to expire in the next couple of years, and they are sort of joining forces together to have a single property tax that takes the existing rates that they have and just kind of divvies it up between the 3 of them, and also adding City Park into the mix. So if this proposal were to go forward and then pass, the voters would have to pass it, approve it. This would give City Park a dedicated tax revenue for the first time.
Yeah,
so, and it would
receive that.
Another big point to this, and again, this is one of those things that's still a little bit being worked out. It's not a done deal, kind of like the hotel tax proposal from the mayor's side. But the Audubon would take kind of a cut from what they already get. I think the estimate was maybe around $6 million annually from. So.
And they say, how will they make up that difference then?
They would have to move some money around from what they.
And also have special events or something. They say more events that would be coming down the pike.
So, right, and they've also. It'd be interesting to see because they have an agreement with the port right now, or the city, to take over the 2 wharves down in the French Quarter. Right. And so they're trying to figure out what to do with that space, and it's going to have to drum up some kind of revenue somehow, is what I'm being told.
So this is in the discussion stages right now, and the council would have to put it on the ballot,
they
right,
would.
For voters to make the choice. And this, of course, is on the heels of not directly on the heels, but following 2 or 3 years ago when Audubon tried to pass the millage, and
it went down big.
Soundly defeated.
Yes.
Down,
50-year tax that
Yes.
is much more than the one that they're looking for now.
Yeah.
So. I think combining it this way would be more palatable.
Definitely.
I think like the strong support for City Park and this, in the downtown part of the city. Right. So I think it.
I mean, that's one of the arguments you heard back then. That why Audubon and not City Park.
Right. And Audubon saw the handwriting on the wall from the last time they tried to float its own. They said, we can't go this alone because that's considered, rather, strongly financed by the zoo and sectarian and. But it's interesting that City Park, which had always been self-sustaining, now seems to be in the need for more money.
Right. And
it's always been in need of money. They've always sort of said we need dedicated money.
They just kind of break even a little bit. But one of the thing with that is, you make it tougher not to have this be enticing when you have everybody together like this. But it also is kind of a way for groups that sort of do similar things, recreation and public parks, to share the resource. That's how this is kind of being pitched.
Make it a little bit more efficient.
Right.
All right, Bo, thanks a lot. Over to E. We started the week with just really a wonderful event.
What comes to mind, you ever watch the Harlem Globetrotters, and the team they play is the Washington Generals? They're just kind of there for background and to make playoffs. Well, the Redskins were the Washington Generals Monday night, and Drew Brees was Meadowlark Lemon. I mean, just kind of like making plays almost at will. It was just a very emotional night, and almost unbelievable theatrically. If you look at the things that came together, first of all, it was on Monday Night Football, and then in New Orleans. And then the big play happened pretty much at prime time, which was right before the end of the first half, so right before the entire audience. Now, I heard Brees being interviewed, and he thinks that the NFL way back when kind of figured that the 5th game of the season would be right about the time that maybe it would be time for his record to be broken, and so the NFL maybe kind of knew what it was doing, but still,
he still had to do it.
It could have gone differently.
Yeah.
Okay?
He had to play at a high level the first 4 games for that to happen,
absolutely,
and he did.
Yeah. And the big play just could have been a short 2-yard pass or something, but it turns out it was a bomb. It was a 62-yard. Couldn't have been more dramatic, and so just very, very touching.
To a rookie who scored his first touchdown and all of that.
And ironically, it's usually you keep the ball, your first touchdown, you had to give that up to the NFL Hall of Fame. We were joking that Brees pulled him aside and said, "Don't worry, I'll get you another." And he did throw him a second touchdown pass.
He didn't seem upset.
And the Saints have had 2 great moments on Monday Night Football, and of course the other one was the time when they came back after Katrina and the famous, what is now known as the Steve Gleason game.
Right.
But that was just such an emotional night.
It was, and it was just so heartwarming to see him go to his family, to his sons, his sons and his daughter, and also he was given a paper certificate, which I thought was really interesting while he was carrying that out. And then he turns around and he gives it to his wife to take care of.
Yes.
But later that night on ESPN, Booger McFarland, and he answers to the name Booger, who used to be with LSU and is now an ESPN commentator, he made a beautiful comment, and he talked about how Drew Brees came to the team right after Katrina. He had an arm injury. He was looking for a team. New Orleans was looking for a future. So he had these 2 that came together. He says they both needed each other at the same time, and then along throw in Sean Payton, and you saw the development that started then.
It's quite a wonderful moment. Congrats to Drew and to all of his family. Really makes the city feel great. Okay, quickly now, looking ahead.
Beginning Monday, the city is going to start installing 485 additional bike racks, showing just how popular biking is in the area now.
All right, Steph.
Election Day is November 6th. Early voting is starting next week, the end of next week, October 23rd through October 30th.
That's coming up on us, Bo.
Also on Monday is going to be a city council hearing to talk about Sewage and Water Board's billing system, and the noteworthy thing about this one is for the first time the manufacturing company from Canada that produced the software is going to make an appearance at this hearing to answer questions from city council members.
All right, it should be interesting. Mike.
Well, I know nobody pays attention when you're in the middle of the Saints season, especially a successful start to the season, but the Pelicans are about to launch their regular season. They've had a relatively dismal preseason, losing all of their games so far. But nevertheless, hopes are somewhat high with a star player in Anthony Davis talking about taking it to the next level, MVP caliber player. We'll see how that pans out.
We'll keep the hopes high. Thanks a lot, you guys, for being here. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.